The divide between President Trump and the Democratic Party was on full display at last night's State of the Union. Take a listen.
These people are crazy, I'm telling you. They're crazy. Democrats are destroying our country, but we've stopped it just in the nick of time, didn't we? You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself. There's drug lords, murderers all over our country. They're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
CBS News Chief Washington analyst Robert Costa joins us now. He spoke with President Trump ahead of last night's speech. Good morning, Bob. So what did the president say to you before his speech?
Good morning. President Trump was pretty optimistic about his upcoming State of the Union when I gave him a phone call ahead of the address yesterday. He talked about how he's going to speak about the economy, tried to address the issue of affordability and prices that are on those issues on the minds of so many Americans. We talked about Iran.
Hey everyone, Adam here, and we're back with another one. In the middle of Trump's address to Congress, Democratic lawmakers began standing up and walking out, leaving the chamber while he was still speaking, making a silent, powerful statement before the cameras. The moment was unscripted and unprecedented. Democratic lawmakers staged multiple forms of protest, boycotting the address, heckling over immigration deaths, and walking out of a Judiciary Committee vote. The collective acts sent a genuine signal about the fractured relationship between Congress and the president. I kept thinking about how unprecedented this all felt. Members of Congress choosing to stand outside with protesters rather than sit inside for the president's speech. That is not something that happens in normal times. That is not something that happens when the political relationship between the executive and legislative branches is functioning properly. And what happened inside the chamber was even more chaotic than what was happening outside. A sitting congressman was physically escorted out by security during the president's address.
At the Capitol, Republicans stood and applauded the president's speech, while Democrats had plenty to say about the State of the Union. Dozens of House and Senate Democrats skipped out on the address entirely, including Kentucky's Morgan McGarvey. Some of those lawmakers gathered at the National Mall for what they called the People's State of the Union. Texas Representative Al Green was escorted out of the State of the Union address for the second straight year. The representative displayed a sign saying, quote, "Black people are not apes," in reference to a video that Trump's social media accounts shared portraying the Obamas as apes. Some Democrats protested in their own ways, inviting the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse or holding up pictures of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. As we mentioned earlier, Trump did not mention the two deaths of those American citizens who were killed by ICE during his address. Virginia's Abigail Spanberger, the governor of Virginia, gave the Democratic Party's response to the State of the Union, attacking Republicans and showcasing what Democrats are doing for the country.
I watched the footage multiple times. A member of the United States House of Representatives being removed from the chamber by Capitol Police while the president was still speaking. Members were holding up signs while Trump was speaking. Not small ones tucked discreetly by their sides, but visible protest signs that read things like "railroaded" as a statement about the immigration policies they were protesting. These are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern. And the pattern tells you something important about what it feels like inside Congress to be in the opposition when the administration is pushing the most aggressive executive agenda in modern American history. The level of organized minority opposition that Trump is facing in his second term is unusual in its intensity and its visibility. Second terms are often quieter than first terms for presidents who have survived a re-election fight. The political battles that define the first term have been fought, and the president has won them. The opposition is exhausted.
Holding up signs with pointed messages and refusing to applaud. The Democrats' message was that this was not normal, as they heard the longest and, according to the House Minority Leader, most divisive ever presidential speech to Congress. As tradition dictates, the Democrats' official rebuttal to Donald Trump's speech came shortly afterwards.
So I promise to be a lot shorter than what you just watched.
From newly elected Senator and ex-CIA analyst Elissa Slotkin.
Do his plans actually help Americans get ahead? Not even close.
The Panama Canal.
In stark contrast to Trump, Slotkin steered clear of inflammatory rhetoric in her 11-minute speech. She told Americans that change should be made, but not in a chaotic or unsafe way, and said Trump's policies were hurting the middle class.
President Trump is trying to deliver an unprecedented giveaway to his billionaire friends. He's on the hunt to find trillions of dollars to pass along to the wealthiest in America. And to do that, he's going to make you pay in every part of your life.
The narrative of the first term's controversies has faded, and the second term's agenda gets implemented in a more normalized environment. That normalization has not happened with Trump's second term. Instead, we are seeing a series of escalating confrontations that are fundamentally different from anything we have witnessed before. The Iran conflict, the constitutional confrontations with courts, the ongoing document fights, the tariff rulings that have generated pushback from within the president's own party, the Republican Senate backlash over various administration policies, the impeachment and 25th Amendment conversations that keep resurfacing. The second term has been more constitutionally chaotic and more politically contested than most second terms in American history. And the walkouts are one visible manifestation of that broader pattern. They are both a symptom of the environment and a contributor to it, raising the temperature of political opposition in ways that generate more confrontation, which generates more opposition, which generates more confrontation.
The true state of the union is this. This union is in crisis right now. Our cities are under attack by lawless law enforcement. Our democracy is wilting under ceaseless attack from a president who wants to be a despot. Millions of Americans are losing their health care because the president has chosen corruption to pad the pockets of his billionaire friends instead of helping average Americans. You're not going to hear any of that in that speech tonight.
A president who continues to hide portions of the Epstein files from both the survivors and the American people. When are they going to release the files?
Now, let us be straight about what the walkouts actually accomplish and what they did not accomplish. The headline says Trump's power crumbles, and we need to be honest about that framing. Trump's formal legal powers did not crumble because Democrats walked out of the State of the Union. The executive branch continues to function. The administration continues to exercise the powers of the presidency across every domain of federal governance. No law was repealed, no policy was reversed, no official was removed from office. A walkout by the minority party in Congress does not change the legal or constitutional powers of the president. What it does, and this is where the crumbles framing captures something real, is change the political optics and the political energy around the presidency in ways that have meaningful consequences. Because power is not just about formal legal authority. It is also about perceived strength, about whether a president appears commanding and in control or isolated and under siege, about whether the spectacle of his major set-piece moments reinforces his narrative of leadership or undermines it. In a State of the Union address where members of Congress are walking out while he is still speaking, heckling him from the floor, and holding rival events outside, that is not the image of a commanding president. That is the image of a president whose political capital in Congress is eroding in ways that will affect his ability to get things done even while his formal legal powers remain intact. Let us start with the State of the Union walkout, because the specifics of who walked out, why they said they walked out, and what they did instead are all important for understanding what this moment actually means. Senator Mark Warner, one of the most senior Democratic senators, a member of the Intelligence Committee, someone who represents the institutionalist wing of the Democratic Party rather than the progressive base, said he could not sit through hours of Trump's falsehoods. That is a strong statement from a centrist Democrat. And it tells you something about the temperature inside the Senate Democratic caucus, that it was not just progressive firebrands leaving early, but institutionalists like Warner making the same calculation. The reason cited, falsehoods, was substantive. Democrats were not walking out for general ideological reasons. Specific triggering events were cited, including fatal immigration raids that have been caught on video. the deaths that occurred during federal immigration enforcement operations, and the footage of those events have been circulating and generating intense criticism in the days leading up to the address. Democrats who walked out cited those specific events as things they could not sit in the chamber and applaud or politely absorb while Trump presented his version of events. The dozen-plus lawmakers who boycotted entirely organized an alternative event, a People's State of the Union rally near the Capitol, organized by progressive groups that itself generated significant media attention and framed the evening as a moment of significant political opposition rather than the usual loyal opposition. Attentiveness of a minority party watching a State of the Union. This is the kind of thing that historically just did not happen. Members of Congress would attend these addresses, they would sit respectfully, they would applaud at appropriate moments, and they would maintain the decorum that the institution demanded. But those norms have been eroding for decades. It began with partisan cheering and booing becoming more visible in the chamber during addresses. It accelerated with the famous outburst from Representative Joe Wilson during Obama's 2009 address. And it has continued to evolve under both Trump administrations as the chamber has become less a scene of legislative collegiality and more a highly charged political arena where every gesture and absence is read as a political signal. The current Democratic walkouts are both a continuation of that erosion of traditional norms and a specific escalation that reflects the particular intensity of opposition to Trump's second-term agenda. Now, let us talk about the Judiciary Committee walkout over the Emil Bove nomination, because this episode is actually more legally and institutionally significant in some ways than the floor walkout, and it has gotten less attention in the coverage. Emil Bove was Trump's former personal lawyer, a pattern that is becoming familiar in how this administration fills positions of institutional trust. His nomination to a federal appeals court generated significant concern among Democrats, who argued that putting a former personal Trump attorney into a lifetime federal judgeship on an appeals court creates exactly the kind of conflict of interest, problem that judicial independence is supposed to prevent. When Senate Democrats on the Judiciary Committee staged their walkout during the confirmation vote, they were not just protesting this specific nomination. They were making a statement about a pattern. The pattern of Trump filling judicial and executive positions with personal loyalists rather than with candidates whose primary qualification is independent professional merit. The walkout did not stop the nomination. Republicans had enough votes to advance it without Democratic participation. But the walkout drew attention to the nomination and the concerns about it in ways that quiet abstention would not have achieved. And it added to the growing body of documented Democratic resistance to what critics characterize as a systematic effort to pack the federal judiciary and executive agencies with loyalists. This is not just about one nomination. This is about a fundamental shift in how the administration approaches the appointment process, prioritizing loyalty over expertise, personal connection over professional qualification. And the walkout was a way of making that concern visible to the public in a way that a simple no vote would not have accomplished. Now, let us put these walkouts in the broader context of the Democratic opposition strategy under Trump's second term, because the walkouts are one tactic in what is becoming a fairly coherent playbook for how a minority party with limited formal power can still shape the political environment and build toward future accountability. The playbook has several components that we have seen deployed simultaneously. Floor protests and heckling to disrupt the scripted set-piece moments that presidents rely on for political narrative reinforcement. Boycotts that create alternative media events, like the People's State of the Union, that compete with the administration's framing for attention. Committee walkouts that draw attention to specific nominees or policies by making the confirmation or advancement of those nominees look controversial rather than routine. Impeachment resolutions that, even when they do not advance, keep the constitutional accountability conversation in the news and on the record. Subpoenas and oversight demands that create a documented record of what was asked for and whether it was provided. Public statements like, the 50-plus Democrats calling for impeachment or 25th Amendment action over various administration policies that signal to the base and to voters what a Democratic majority would do differently. None of these tactics individually changes the formal power balance between the administration and the congressional minority. But collectively, they create an environment in which Trump's presidency is under constant visible challenge, in which every major moment is contested rather than celebrated, in which the narrative of strong, commanding presidential leadership keeps colliding with images of opposition, defiance, and institutional friction. Let us also talk about the Republican response to the walkouts, because how Republicans reacted tells you something important about the political dynamics inside Congress. Republican members condemned the Democratic walkouts as outrageous antics. That characterization is predictable and expected. The majority party defending the dignity of his president's address by condemning minority disruption. But here is what the Republican response does not include. It does not include significant numbers of Republican members joining the criticism of the administration that motivated the walkout. The immigration death footage, the falsehoods, the policy concerns that Democrats cited when they left, those substantive concerns, the things that drove the walkout, are not being substantively engaged by the Republican response. The response is procedural and political. You should not have walked out rather than substantive. Here is our answer to the concerns you were raising. And that gap between the Democrats' substantive concerns and the Republicans' procedural response is itself politically significant. It means the specific issues that drove the walkout are not being addressed and defended by the majority. They are being redirected into a conversation about decorum rather than substance, which of course has its own cost in an environment where voters increasingly see through procedural deflection to the underlying policy questions that the deflection is designed to avoid. When the response to a substantive concern about immigration deaths is a complaint about walking out, the substantive concern does not get addressed. And that leaves the concern on the table, festering, generating more opposition, more resistance, more visible protest. Now let us talk about what these walkouts signal to the 2026 midterm electorate. Because everything that happens in Congress right now is happening in the shadow of elections that are less than a year away. The walkouts are not just statements about how Democrats feel about Trump's current conduct. They are statements directed at voters in competitive districts who will determine whether Democrats can win back the House in 2026. The calculation behind high visibility resistance tactics, the walkouts, the boycotts, the alternative events, is that they energize the Democratic base in ways that quiet procedural resistance does not. They give ordinary Democratic voters, donors, and activists the sense that their representatives are fighting visibly, dramatically, publicly, rather than going through the motions of a minority party that lacks the power to stop the agenda, but shows up anyway. That energization is strategically important for building the coalition and the financial resources needed to compete in 2026. But it also carries risks. The same high visibility disruption that energizes the Democratic base can generate backlash among independent voters who value institutional decorum and who may read the walkouts as the kind of polarizing theatrics that they are tired of from both sides. Whether the energy gains outweigh the backlash risk is a genuine strategic question that different Democratic members are answering differently. Some leaning into the confrontational tactics, some maintaining a more decorous approach based on their reading of their own district dynamics. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to this kind of political strategy, and the diversity of responses within the Democratic caucus reflects that reality. Let us also think about what the pattern of Democratic congressional resistance across all of its forms, the walkouts, the impeachment resolutions, the committee protests, the war powers fights, the oversight demands, tells us about the broader political environment of the second term. Because viewed from a historical perspective, the level of organized minority opposition that Trump is facing in his second term is unusual in its intensity and its visibility. Second terms are often quieter than first terms for presidents who have survived a re-election fight. The political battles that define the first term have been fought, and the president has won them. The opposition is exhausted. The narrative of the first term's controversies has faded, and the second term's agenda gets implemented in a more normalized environment. That normalization has not happened with Trump's second term. The Iran conflict, the constitutional confrontations with courts, the ongoing document fights, the tariff rulings that have generated significant pushback, the Republican Senate backlash over various administration policies, the impeachment and 25th Amendment conversations that keep resurfacing. The second term has been more constitutionally chaotic and more politically contested than most second terms in American history. And the walkouts are one visible manifestation of that broader pattern. They are both a symptom of the environment and a contributor to it, raising the temperature of political opposition in ways that generate more confrontation, which generates more opposition, which generates more confrontation. Now let us think about the specific image that the State of the Union walkout created and why images matter in political communication. Because the State of the Union address is one of the most carefully managed set-piece events in American political life. Presidents spend weeks preparing their remarks. The speech is designed to project strength, optimism, command, and legislative agenda setting. The visual of the president at the podium addressing a joint session of Congress with the cabinet and the military leadership and the justices arrayed before them is a visual of institutional power. And when members of that audience stand up and leave, visibly, publicly, for the cameras, they disrupt that visual in a way that words alone cannot. The walkout becomes the story, not the speech, not the agenda that was announced, not the policy proposals that were laid out. The story is who left and why, and what that says about the state of the president's relationship with the legislative branch he needs to work with to accomplish anything. That is the political power of the walkout as a tactic. It hijacks the event's visual narrative. It turns a moment designed to project presidential strength into a moment that is being analyzed through the lens of presidential isolation. And in a media environment where the visual is often more powerful than the text, where what people remember is the image of walking senators, not the specific policy commitments in the speech, the walkout achieves a political communication goal that no counter speech or press release could have achieved in the same way. And here is the broader historical context that helps explain why walkouts and boycotts have become a more prominent feature of congressional opposition in recent years. The tradition of respectful bipartisan attendance at State of the Union addresses, both parties sitting together in the chamber, applauding selectively but not disrupting, is a norm that has been eroding for decades. It began with partisan cheering and booing becoming more visible in the chamber during addresses. It accelerated with the famous outburst from Representative Joe Wilson during Obama's 2009 address. And it has continued to evolve under both Trump administrations as the chamber has become less a scene of legislative collegiality and more a highly charged political arena where every gesture and absence is read as a political signal. The current Democratic walkouts are both a continuation of that erosion of traditional norms and a specific escalation that reflects the particular intensity of opposition to Trump's second-term agenda. They represent a calculation by Democratic members that the traditional norm of respectful attendance no longer serves their political interests or their constituents' expectations. And that calculation, right or wrong in strategic terms, tells you something important about how far the informal norms of congressional conduct have shifted in an era of extreme partisan polarization. The norms that made the State of the Union a moment of unified national display are giving way to norms in which it functions as one more partisan battleground, where symbolic acts of resistance are as carefully calculated as any floor vote. Now, let us also think about what these walkouts mean for the people who are not members of Congress, but who are watching and who care about the outcome. The Democratic base, the independent voters who are uncomfortable with Trump's conduct, but uncertain about the opposition's approach. The competitive district Republican voters who have been drifting away from the administration over various concerns and who might be persuaded to support a Democratic candidate in 2026. Each of those audiences receives the walkout news differently. The Democratic base sees fighters who refuse to normalize what they view as an illegitimate presidency. Some independents see principled resistance. Others see partisan theater that makes everyone look bad. And the Republican adjacent voters who have been moving towards skepticism of the administration may see the walkouts as confirmation that the political environment is too polarized for anyone to fix. Those varied reactions to the same event illustrate why political communication in the current environment is so difficult, and why no single tactic, not walkouts, not careful institutionalism, not aggressive oversight, can reach all of the audiences that matter simultaneously. Democratic strategists are making judgment calls about which audiences to prioritize, knowing that the choices they make will satisfy some constituencies and frustrate others. And the walkout tactic represents a choice to prioritize base energization over the kind of decorous institutionalism that might appeal to uncertain independents, but that the progressive base views as complicity with a norm-breaking administration. And one final thought before we close today. The walkout as a political tactic has a long and complicated history in American democratic life. State legislators in various states have walked out to deny quorum and prevent votes on legislation they oppose. Members of the British Parliament have staged theatrical walkouts to dramatize opposition. Congressional members have boycotted addresses, confirmation hearings, and committee proceedings when they concluded that participation was normalizing something that should not be normalized. The specific history matters because it tells you that what feels unprecedented in the moment often has precedents that are worth understanding. The current Democratic walkouts at Trump's State of the Union addresses and committee proceedings are not inventing a tactic. They are deploying a tactic that has a history of use by minority parties who lack the formal power to stop a majority agenda, but who refuse to simply provide the visual legitimacy of quiet attendance at events they deeply oppose. Whether it is the right tactic at this specific moment for this specific opposition, whether it builds the coalition needed to win in 2026, or whether it energizes the base while alienating the persuadables, is the strategic question that will be answered by the next election. But the tactic itself is as American as the institutions inside which it is being deployed. And understanding its history helps you evaluate its current use more clearly than the partisan framing on either side would allow. And here is the thing about all of the opposition tactics we have covered today that I think is most important for understanding the current political moment. They are all happening simultaneously in a compressed period in the context of a second term that is generating more constitutional confrontation, more court battles, more impeachment pressure, and more public calls for accountability than most second terms produce. The simultaneity matters. When you have court rulings, Republican Senate backlash, impeachment resolutions, walkouts, overseas policy challenges, and economic concerns all happening in the same political moment. When all of those pressures are accumulating at the same time, rather than being spread out over years, the political environment that gets created is qualitatively different from what any one of those pressures would produce alone. It is an environment of sustained, compounding, multi-directional pressure on the presidency that is simultaneously defending its agenda from courts, managing rebellion from its own party senators, handling foreign policy challenges, dealing with documented concerns from the public, and now watching the opposition party turn its most visible ceremonial moment into a scene of documented defection and protest. That is what crumbling power actually looks like. Not a single moment of formal legal defeat, but the accumulation of signals from every direction that the institutional support and political capital on which effective governing depends is eroding. The walkout is one signal, but it is part of a larger pattern of signals that, taken together, tell a story about a presidency under pressure, unlike almost any in modern American history. The traditions that once held this institution together are giving way. The norms that made the State of the Union a moment of national unity are being replaced by something more fragmented, more confrontational, more overtly political. And the walkouts are both a symptom of that transformation and a driver of it. Every act of resistance Every walkout, every boycott, every alternative event, every disruption of the carefully scripted set-piece moments that presidents rely on to project strength chips away at the perception of presidential power. And in politics, perception is reality. When the perception of power erodes, the reality of power erodes with it. The formal legal powers remain, but the ability to govern effectively, to build coalitions, to pass legislation, to maintain the support of the institutions that make presidential power real. That ability depends on a perception of strength that the walkouts are systematically undermining. This is not about a single moment, this is about a cumulative process. And that process is unfolding right now, in real time, on the floor of the United States Congress.